Okay, good morning, everybody, to day 3 of the 5-day training, How to Believe in You. I don't know why, I just play recording and usually the sound pops up recording, but it didn't do anything, but I think it is recording. If you could just type on the chat that you can hear me and see the screen, that would be awesome. So yeah, I think it is recording. So just to know that I am on the right track to get going with day 3. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ben. Okay. A little louder, my voice. Maybe I need to be closer to the microphone. Hold on. Some people are joining right now. Let me admit them. Okay, so you might be watching this replay. So depending on the time that you're watching, good afternoon and good evening. And of course, good morning. So I hope you have been able to catch up the day 1 and 2 because I think I'm making it a little bit simple. I think when I did the Energetics of Money workshop last month, I probably felt like I was giving actually too much information in a way that wasn't helping people to simplify. I wanted to simplify this time a little bit, although there's a tendency of me wanting to add more and more and more, as you can probably, as you observe the last 2 days, where I wanted to make it. So that's why it's important for me to decide that I'm going to just talk 45 minutes. And if I decide 45 minutes, probably I will be up all the way to 50 and I end there, right? So what I wanted to start with today is to really help you connect with the initial intention of this workshop or training, and then to really help you connect with your actual life, because easily this kind of talk can become a sort of a lecture style, listening in and understanding the concept, and then when you go back to your life, nothing is getting connected, right? So I'm gonna start by asking you your belief, because this is about how to believe in your potential. And believing in your potential means that you're seeking something more than you're currently experiencing in your life. So one of the things that I talked about on day 1, maybe also on day 2, was the outside result is a reflection of your belief. You can never have any life experience that is beyond your belief, because belief is going to be the lens that you see through the world, and that becomes your experience. And I'm gonna get into more of the the law of attraction manifestation stuff, which I touch upon a little bit. When you believe, you have a certain thought and you have a certain feeling, and that becomes the root cause of the manifestation in the physical world, right? So belief is like uh, a thermostat or operating system that dictates that thinking and feeling, and that creates your reality. And one thing that I was clear on day 1 and also day 2 is that, and I really want people to get this in a deeper level, that you do not exist anywhere but in your mind. You do not exist anywhere else but in your mind. Now, you might say that, your body exists in space. You have a lot of stuff other than your, the conception, but everything begins in your mind, right? So who you are is what we are. You don't need to change who you are. That's what I have been talking about. You only need to see yourself differently. So the subtitle of this training is the art of transforming the self. Now, transforming is about trans meaning change, the formation of the self, and the self that we are changing is in our mind, in our thinking. So just to go over a little bit, what we talked about day 1, day 2. Day 1, I talked about the focus needs to be how we see ourselves, right? And we're not changing the ourself, but we're changing how we see. And then if we are the identity of who we are is in our mind, is based on how we see ourselves, that is deeply connected with your moment to moment thinking. That's why we need to be so protective and disciplined in the thoughts that we choose to think, right? You can once in a while work on the law of attraction and then habitually keep thinking negative thoughts or focusing on the lack. That's not going to work, because if you're focusing on the lack and if you're giving attention to what's not working of the or the problem, you are shaping that identity of who you are based on what you are saying to yourself, and that is going to be integrated in how you are seeing. So, if you haven't had a chance to watch the day one, day two, I think it's pretty deep and clear and simple. So I want you to go back to watch and then come back to this. And what we're focusing on, if there's one thing that I want everyone to get out of this 5 day, is that we're changing the subject, not the object. So many people are focusing on the object. Now, what does that mean? It means that I am here and myself is here, right? So in our mind, I see myself. And many people have an understanding and perspective around myself based on what happened in the past, based on the result that's happening, experiencing in the outside. And the myself is the object. It's not that we need to change the myself, but we need to change the I see. How am I seen? Yeah. So I know that I have expressed this on day one and also day two, but it has been my promise that I'm going to be repeating some of the thing over and over from multiple angles, because that is repetition is a key for us to really change the way that we operate habitually. So that is our topic today, transforming the habitual self. So I am going to, this is day two, day three. So I'm going to start with a little bit of reflection, because by starting with the reflection, I think it's going to help you connect deeper with your day-to-day life. So the reflection today is, what are the habitual way of operating that you want to change? Now, what are the action patterns that the new version of you would have? So in the process of changing your belief, expanding your belief might be a better way to say it, we need to begin working on seeing ourselves in our mind differently. And only when you are able to see, and that new version of you that you're seeing in your mind's eyes becomes more natural than how you're currently operating in the physical world, the belief begin changing. That's not making sense. Let me say that again. So we have an ability to consciously imagine whatever we want to imagine in the screen of our mind. And let's say if I said what I said yesterday, that the conception of yourself, who you are, only lives and resides in your mind, then that imagination that we're entertaining is going to be the utmost key for you to change your belief, who you think you are, who you feel you are. And then the process works this way. You mentally picture in your mind's eyes first, and then when you play that movie in your mind, you start creating some feeling around it, right? Everyone has a certain level of feeling about the person that you're imagining. Like, for instance, you have your name, right? You have your name, and there might be somebody else who has the same name, but even though it spells exactly the same, and then it pronounces and it sounds the same, when you say your name, you have a certain feeling based on the meaning that you're attaching to yourself, right? Now, that meaning is in your mind. But because we are a thinking, feeling creature, we think with the mind and we feel in our body. everything that we entertain in our mind's eyes as a thought, as a picture, there is an associated feeling around it, right? So we consciously visualize and imagine who we want to become in our mind's eyes. And then we start practicing feeling how it feels to be that person. And then when that feeling of that image in your mind, when you consistently stay in the feeling long enough, that feeling becomes your new belief. And then we need to sort of have some practice around being there all the time, right? Now, that is how I recommend to shift anybody's belief. It's simple step 1, 2, 3, right? Visualize, feel, and stay there long enough so until that becomes more natural than the way that you're currently operating. It's very simple. I'm not using any tool, outside tool. I'm recommending people to use your own mind and the power of choice that I'll be talking about heavily today, and to make that fourth dimensional imagination more vivid than the third dimensional physical world. Because one thing that I mentioned yesterday is that many people refer the physical world as their quote unquote reality. And I think people call that reality because they believe that that is their reality. But if where the self, the conception of yourself start and resides is only in your mind, to me, your real reality is in your thinking, in your mind. And then when you start really and truly understanding that conscious manifestation process where the seed of all the effect symptoms in the outside world start with your thinking, that is the real reality. Yeah. Now, when you focus on the real reality, your third dimensional reality becomes your creation. You become the creator of the reality, the third dimensional reality. So I hope that makes sense, that chain of thought. So that is a simple step, right? Conscious imagination, feel in your body. So the vibration in your body shift. And then when you start sustaining that vibration long enough, you become somebody else because we're energetic and vibrational being. That's how we change our belief. We use our own mind, the power of the mind, the mental faculty, which is your attention and visualization, and also, perception, perspective, to be able to stay in that desire visual in our mind. Now, day 2, yesterday I talked about transcending biological fear, and day 3 today is going to be transforming the habitual self. The reason that I have put these 2 items in this belief training is because these 2 things, fear and habits, are what usually, not usually, all the time, what stops people from pursuing this practice and committing and dedicating and be loyal to it. And yesterday I talked about the 2. I'm just going to use this word. This is not the best word, but I'm going to use this word. The 2 wrong ways to visualize in your mind and then facilitate thinking is to let the negativity in the outside world affecting your thinking. So, if there's a lack or problem or challenge in the physical world, we don't want to let that affect our thinking. Or the memory of the past, recalling that, when that is disempowering, we don't want to even let that affect our thinking. Because if we let that affect our thinking, we're creating more of the same self in our mind. If the outside problem is affecting our thinking, the problem begins affecting the conception of ourselves. And we don't want that. I don't want that. I don't think you would want that, right? Because we all want to construct and shape a empowering version of ourselves, and the expansion of that is going to lead us to create the belief in our potential. Does that make sense? So there are three ways that most people think: letting the outside to influence thinking, the the past memory affecting their thinking. But we want to learn how to suspend those when they are disempowering, and learn how to shift out of that and only entertain your thinking based on what's empowering. And I call this, present future instead of past present. You focus on the present future and the desired outcome, and you can imagine whatever you want to imagine. And we want to have a practice of creating ourselves based on what empowers us. So that was stage two. Two things that prevents us from dedicating to this practice. We get distracted by the outside noise and our past memory. Now, the other one is the topic today, right? Habit. Like, and if you're in a habit, I think I mentioned that those are the product of our autonomic nervous system, right? The biology as an animal, there is a way for us to just sort of set a version to operate without thinking about it. That's what habit means, right? What's the definition of habit? Oh, this one. What is the definition of habit? Habit is a action that we take without any conscious thought. But this action includes not only the movement of the body, but habitual thinking, habitual emotions, habitual feeling. So it's basically the movement of the energetic field, right? So it's really important for us to uh, become conscious of our habitual state. The opposite of habit to me is choice and intention. Choice is very conscious, habit is very unconscious, and intention is about bringing your attention to the present moment and begin directing the energy by, directing your thinking to facilitate the energy in your body and to have a clear picture of what is it that you would like to create. That is the intention, right? So in order to become intentional, we need an attention, the power of our attention and the direction. Habit doesn't have a attention and direction. Does that make sense? So there is a lot of combining with what we talked about yesterday, because the habit and fear goes hand in hand. We habitually let the past memory dictate our thinking. We habitually let the outside situation dictate our thinking. And this is not my favorite quote, but it's going to be maybe top five. And I'm going to kind of rephrase it a little bit, paraphrase it. So if we do not consciously and deliberately form a good habit or good thinking pattern, we subconsciously start forming a bad one or default state. Does that make sense? So what's the secret of not being habitual? We need to constantly needs to be intentional. And then we need to understand the mechanism of habit. Habit is a good thing when we start owning that power, but most of us, the habit and also the fear from yesterday, owns us, right? So again, why am I talking about fear and habit? Because these patterns are the two enemies that prevent us from being dedicated and be loyal to the practice of transformation, to stay and allows us to sustain in the fourth dimensional thinking and in conscious imagination. Conscious imagination is something that only humans can do out of all the animals. The dog or the turtle or the fish, they don't know how to visualize and imagine their desired outcome. I don't even think that they can, think about well, there's not any like a future or path. That's the language that we're using, but direct your attention, the mind's eyes, and then begin imagining whatever you want to imagine. I don't think dog or fish or turtle, I don't know why I'm picking these three animals, but are able to do that, but only humans do. But what's happening to most of us is that that imagination actually using us by imagining as a default habitual um, version of us, and then going to thinking about what we do not want or what's lacking or the pain from the past, flashbacks, and then that comes to our imagination. Does that make sense? So habitually we're operating, but the imagination, when you operate on a habitual way, the imagination begins using us and takes us everywhere subconsciously. So this is another way of saying your narrative inside. Like what are we thinking every single moment? And that thinking, because thinking is the product of the mind. And I know that, meditation teachers, spiritual teachers talk about meditating and like emptying the mind and not to think. It's not possible for the mind to not to think, because that's like almost saying to not to breathe for the lungs. The function of the lung is to breathe. That's why the lungs is given. The function of the mind is to think. So people want to decompress and unplug from their life, and they want to not to think, but it's not that thinking is bad. What if you're thinking empowering thought all the time? What if you're thinking about all the things that energizes you about nature, uh, possibilities, excitement, inspirations, your family, whatever that is that empowers you? What if you are able to guide your attention to think constantly those thoughts that empowers you and the self in your mind? You wouldn't want to take a break from it. Does that make sense? So the idea of unplugging is unplugging from the disempowering thinking, not from the thinking, if that makes sense. It's like what if that empowering thought is like getting a full body massage all the time? Well, full body massage all day might be tiring, but you know what I mean? Like things that makes you feel good, things that makes you feel uplifting and energized. That's something that we do not want to take a break from, right? So meditation is awesome because it gives us a space to be able to observe, which is actually the beginning of choice, and to not to become habitual. But the point that I wanted to sort of deliver today here is that if we become intentional and highly conscious of the choice of our thinking, this week is all about thinking, to really pay attention to our thinking, all the thinkings that's happening in our mind, narrative that is highly habitual, things that happens as a default state. Everyone has some sort of patterns in that, and want to be able to observe those patterns. So what are the two ways of thinking that makes us stuck? Number two is the same as number one, what I talked about yesterday. Not to let the past influence our thinking today, not to let the outside, that is this empowering, affect our thinking. Does that make sense? So I am going to stop this share, and I am going to share my secret weapon, which is the whiteboard. So yesterday I talked about the mind, that's the thinking, and the body, that's the healing. Yeah. And then I talked about this cycle. You can choose intentionally for the mind to think something so the body can feel what you're thinking. This is the cycle that we really want to develop. When we pay attention to something and consciously become aware of, and when we begin observing our thinking, we can shift out of any disempowering narrative and thought, and then we can begin choosing to think thoughts that serves us. And then we want to practice conscious imagination. So our mode of living is going to be driven by present, future. Now, a little bit of dynamic between the mind and the body, which is interesting because I often talk about, inside and the outside, right? And then even in this context, belief, I'm talking about the belief inside is the root of the outside effect. One thing that's interesting is that your body is in the physical space, is in the third dimension, it's in the realm of effect. And then because the mind and the body are connected, what you felt in the past, what happened in the past, the experience, you're carrying over to the present moment in the effect body. So what happens often, this is where a lot of people I see get stuck, where the body, so this is just 5% conscious mind, 95% subconscious mind. This is just one way to say it could be, some people say it's 96, 98%, right? So your mind and your body, right? Your body is also your subconscious mind. So it's automatic. Subconscious mind, you are not aware of it, right? And all the habits goes into your subconscious mind, so you don't need to be thinking about it. And the way that the body feels from the information from the past is in your subconscious realm, and that feeling also stimulate you to think a certain thoughts. So this is the past present way of operating that habitually you think thoughts impacted by the feeling in the body, right? But we want to be intentional and then start from the mind. Does that make sense? I'm going to go slow a little bit so people can sort of let it sink and then look at what you see and process a little bit. So this is a never-ending cycle. The feeling of the body that comes from the past impact your thinking, past, present, and that is habitual. It just happens automatically. Yeah. And then if I can spotlight the main theme of this week, which is the concept of self is in your mind, you will recreate more of the same. If you let the feeling body, past, present, habitually impact your thinking moment to moment, and then if the thinking is the seed of who you are in your mind, you will recreate the same thing over and over every single day, every single week, every single month, every single year. Does that make sense? So the work that needs to be done in order to expand the belief by shifting the concept of the self that resides in your mind by using the conscious imagination and every single moment thinking, because what you say is words, and whenever you say something, it's coming from the self. And anything and everything that you say adds up to your identity, is to use the intention and power of the choice and the attention to practice making this conscious imagination a lifestyle. So what I'm asking everyone is, and I attract people who already have some sort of meditation or spiritual or mindset practice. Um, but I think what I'm asking is to not to, if this resonates with you, and if you really want to dive into the practice of shifting your belief and to be in charge of who you are and who you can become by truly training your mind to shape the new version in your imagination, because that's where everything begins. I don't think we want to treat this work of conscious imagination to do only when we feel like it. Does that make sense? Like, I almost want people to become, if this resonates with you and if you feel like you want to dive in, like each and every one of us needs to be a athlete of our own conception of ourselves. So I'm just going to use the analogy of maybe ballet dancer, because I have a dance background. Like, if they want to become a professional dancer, they're not doing only when they feel like it, right? They are loyal and dedicated to the practice, right? If somebody who is Olympic athlete, if they want to dedicate their crafting their art, they're not going to be doing what they're doing based on how they feel like it. This needs to drive the life, and all the pieces that we're doing in life needs to be embedded on top of this space. Like, I think what I really want people to be convinced is this week is that the fourth dimensional imaginational world, the thinking world, is what we want to really pay attention to and then live from. Thinking needs to lead to the effect and the result, not effect and the result affecting our thinking. So how can we dedicate this work of conscious imagination and then make that as an utmost priority of your lifestyle to be able to own the power of your mind? And if we don't own the power of the mind, it's gonna own you. It's either or. It's not gonna be like a let me own today and you can own tomorrow. Does that make sense? So I think the conscious imagination. So when you own the mind and then be able to deliver, navigate your attention to be intentional and stay in the power of choice, when you are in that energy, only then you can observe your habit and you can observe your default state and then move from the default into a design. And then living from the present future, the empowering outcome that you want to create in the physical world in your mind's eyes, and then use that power. And that's number one, right? Number one is to practice the attention and the visualization, conscious imagination. But then another layer of this is to practice feel that imagination, so you can begin altering how you feel about you. So what you imagine in your mind's eyes is called self-image, right? The image that you hold in the picture of your mind. The self in your mind is a self-image. The feeling that is associated with how you see you is your self-esteem, how you feel about you, which is your worthiness. Worthiness is a feeling. And one thing that I mentioned yesterday was the worthiness needs to come from within. your worthiness, how you feel about you, and how powerful you feel about you, confident you feel about you, needs to come 100% from the picture that you entertain in your mind, not based on the outside feedback or criticism or judgment or even compliment or somebody liking you. Does that make sense? So this image is a sacred picture of you, which I'm going to be talking more tomorrow. The ideal version of you is what we are here to entertain and create in this physical world. And the reason I'm saying that, I didn't talk too much about the spiritual aspect of it, maybe on day one, but there's the fifth dimension, which is the spiritual plane, the essence of who we are. And what we're talking about here, belief and identity, is a mental construct. Who you are in this physical world in the context of relationship with others is just a mental construct. What that mean? What does that mean? That means that it's just another thought. It's an intellectual activity. So the personality, identity, and the self that we're talking about here is in the intellect, in the fourth dimension. So in the fifth dimension, there's only abundance, there's only plenty, there's only fulfillment, there's only happiness. There's no room for the contrast, which is the fear and the lack. So nothing is created or destroyed in the spiritual plane. We're here, arrive on this earth plane to utilize this conscious imagination that humans, only humans among all animals, are gifted, and deliberately and intentionally use that screen of the picture to form and shape a self in our mind, and in practice transferring that image into a vibrational resonance in the physical body through the heart and through the body, so we can transmute what's already created in the spiritual plane in the physical form. That is how humans are designed to live. Humans are designed to live by consciously imagining what we desire, so we can move over what's already perfect in the spiritual plane in this physical plane. So, and in many people are living this way unconsciously, like Olympic athletes who aim for their ideal version, like they do visualization, right? When they visualize the outcome, they visualize their breaking the record, they visualize how they're swimming, how they're jumping, and then they only entertain that in their mind so they can begin constructing the new version of the self using the environment called Olympic. Does that make sense? That's what they're doing. Olympic athletes are not focusing on their past memory or trauma. Olympic athletes are not focusing on, oh, this practice run was a little bit lacking. They're not focusing on those problems, but they use that as a feedback and constantly navigating their attention to the desired outcome using conscious imagination. They're living in the future present mode. And then by entertaining that imagery, they go to that feeling of the whole body, living as if they're already there. And they're expanding that sense of self in their mind, and the result follows because they change their belief. Nobody changed the outcome without expanding their belief. Nobody changed the outcome without shifting how they see themselves. In their mind's eyes, they see themselves performing differently, doing things differently first. And then by going there, that becomes more natural than how actually they are in the physical world. When the conscious imagination becomes much, much more natural than how they're operating in the physical world, that is a good sign that probably in the physical world, you are showing up or creating the result that you're imagining in the mental picture. And that is the moment that you're actually living exactly how humans are designed to live. From the fifth spiritual through fourth intellectual into the third physical dimension. So, what is the key point of today? Today, I'm talking about transforming the habitual self. Transforming the habitual self. I'm so happy that I'm gonna get to finish on time today, right here. So what are the habitual way of operating that you want to change? So we need to identify the habit pattern. Now, there might be lots of habitual pattern that you want to change, right? But I would like you to begin by the habitual thinking. What are the habitual thinking that you might be sort of stuck or you might be um, familiar that you would like to shift? And then what are the action patterns that the new version of you would have? Yeah. I'm just realizing the chat. Danielle is saying absolutely it's not to be used just when it's convenient for us. Yes. So the intention needs to be constantly present, not only when we feel like it. Only when we feel like, meditate or visualize only when we feel like it is going to, that's not going to be, loyal enough. And I'm using more of the term dedicated and loyal because sometimes, the world's discipline is pretty rigid for me. Yeah. So how can you become loyal and dedicated to your ideal? This is something that I talked about yesterday, which I'm going to talk about tomorrow, but I'm going to talk about a little bit right now. Self-love, true self-love is to fall in love with your ideal, not fall in love with what you see yourself lacking or pain in the past. I think in the spiritual community, there's this connotation that loving yourself is loving anything, pain, emotional stuff in the past. Loving yourself is to know who you are at the essential level. You are perfect. And to understand that the self is not determined because you can become whoever you want to become by seeing yourself differently, because the self exists only in your mind and you can choose to think anything you want to think. So what is loving yourself? In order to love yourself fully, we need to understand who the self is. The self in the intellectual plane, in the physical world, is dynamic. You can become whoever you want the self to be. So who is it that we are loving, right? So true self-love is to love and become loyal and dedicate to your ideal self. And ideal self, who is the ideal self? Whoever you desire to become. But we're not staying as somebody who we feel inferior than other, because there's only one mind after all. So if somebody else is doing something, we tend to look at it as, oh, that person is great. That person has something that makes them do whatever they do. And then it's a natural inclination that we tend to sort of lower ourselves to feel inferior. But it's the other way. If somebody else is doing, because we only have one mind after all, it means that you can do it as well. And then we want to monitor the thoughts. What are we thinking? What are we saying to ourselves in that sort of instance, right? So fear and habit, right? Those are the two obstacles that people face that prevents us from expanding our belief. So we want to identify what those are. Today is about identifying the habitual pattern that might be making us disempower. So identify that, and we come back tomorrow talking about the decision to choose your potential. That's where I want to go. Okay. And also, something that I think I said this in the first day, but not yesterday. I'm taking questions. So Saturday at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, we're doing bonus training and Q&A, right? So we have today, tomorrow is a decision to choose your potential. Friday, we don't have any session. I decided to not to do Friday so people can catch up with the replay and do a little bit of reflection. And each day when you watch the videos and when you do the reflection, please have your questions aside so you can ask on Saturday. And if you're unable to attend Saturday, I think I'm gonna post in the Facebook group if anybody have any question you want me to answer on Saturday, so you can post the question there. And even though you might not be present live on Saturday Zoom session, I will answer just kind of looking at the Facebook feed post. Yeah, that is it, everyone. Thank you for joining live, watching replay, and that is it, right? Have a great day and enjoy the practice reflection, and I will see you tomorrow.